My name is Diane Whitaker, and the last thing I expected to hear from my own daughter was, "Mom, can you stop caring for me like I'm a child all the time? Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. It didn't happen during a fight. It wasn't screamed or thrown like a weapon across the room. It was said quietly, barely above a whisper in the middle of a cafe while she scrolled on her phone, not even looking at me. We'd met for brunch. I'd made a small comment. Something harmless. "You've lost weight. Are you eating enough?" That's all it took. She sighed, put down her fork and said with surgical precision, "Mom, can you stop caring for me like I'm a child all the time?" It felt like someone reached across the table and slapped me with an open hand. But worse than pain was the silence that followed. I just nodded. I didn't say anything after that. She finished her latte and 20 minutes later we parted with a stiff hug outside. She didn't turn around as she walked away. I did just once and saw nothing but her shoulders disappearing into the crowd. That was the moment it began. The distance. The withdrawal. The realization that perhaps I had become something to be tolerated, not treasured. You have to understand I wasn't always this quiet. I used to be the kind of mother who knew the dates of every test, the names of every friend, even the smell of Emma's hair after swim practice. I was there for everything. The scraped knees, the boy problems, the broken dreams. And for a while she wanted me there. But children grow, and parents sometimes forget to let go. Or maybe I just didn't want to. Not after giving up everything else, my marriage, my career, my time, my sleep for her. It was always just the two of us. Her father left when she was 4. She doesn't remember much about him, and I never filled in the blanks. Not because I wanted to lie, but because I wanted her to feel whole. Like she was enough. And she was. She always was. When she got into Colombia, I cried in the kitchen for 2 hours, both proud and terrified. When she moved to the city, I drove up once a month to drop off groceries and clean her apartment without being asked. I paid off her loans without telling her. I sat through job fairs, listened to her rehearse presentations, even ironed her interview suit the night before she landed her first job. So yes, maybe I hovered. Maybe I couldn't see where the line between love and control blurred. But that day in the cafe, something shifted. And not just in her. In me. I drove home with the radio off my fingers, trembling slightly on the wheel. I thought I'd cry, but I didn't. Not then. I sat at the dining table that night, staring at the empty second chair. It used to be hers. Now it was just another piece of wood and fabric. And in the days that followed, I kept thinking about that sentence. Can you stop caring for me like I'm a child? What does that even mean? Is care only valid if it's silent? Is love only acceptable when it doesn't inconvenience? For a while, I blamed myself. I dissected every call, every word, every moment when I might have made her feel smothered. I told myself I should have adapted, backed off earlier, treated her more like a friend, less like a daughter. But then another thought crept in. What if the problem wasn't just me? What if Emma had built her identity on pushing me away, needing to feel independent by rejecting the one person who'd always been there? Was that fair? Was that love? I don't know. All I know is something quiet inside me started shutting down. I didn't call her that week. I waited to see if she'd call me. She didn't. The next week, I sent her a text. "Hope your meeting went well. Let me know if you need anything." No reply. I started tracking the silence like a calendar. Day 3, day 5, day 7. By the 10th day, I stopped expecting the phone to buzz. I looked at the plants by the window, overwatered like always. I looked at the photos on the mantel, Emma's graduation, her childhood birthday cake with crooked candles, a picture of us in the snow wearing matching red scarves. It used to bring warmth. Now it felt like a museum of someone else's joy. And yet, in a strange way, her silence gave me space. For the first time in years, I walked to the farmer's market without checking my phone every few minutes. I joined a watercolor class at the library. I even started writing again short, clumsy poems about loss and light and letting go. But don't mistake me, I still missed her. I missed her laugh, her sarcasm, the way she used to call me mama when she wanted something. Still, something had broken. And maybe that break was the only way either of us would ever see each other clearly. I didn't set out to be overbearing. I only wanted to protect her. That's what I told myself time and again, like a mantra I clung to whenever I felt her pull away. You see, when you raise a child on your own, you become the net, the rope, the walls, and the roof, all of it. You become the sun and the storm. Every bruise, every mistake, every misstep, you feel it twice as hard because there's no one else to share the blame with. Emma was everything I had. I poured myself into her not out of obligation, but because it felt like purpose. I gave up dating hobbies, even friendships. I told myself there would be time for me later. Later never came. When Emma was in high school, she had her first panic attack. It was after she got a B+ on a chemistry test, not a failure, not even close. But she spiraled. I held her in her bedroom, my back aching from the awkward position, whispering, "You're okay, I've got you." That night, I threw away every parenting book that told me to teach independence through distance. Instead, I chose presence. Maybe too much of it. Looking back now, I realize I shaped my love to be a fortress. But a fortress can become a prison even if it's made of velvet and affection. When she was accepted into Columbia, she cried in my arms. I'll never forget how small she felt in that moment, even though she was almost an adult. She whispered, "I'm scared to leave you, Mom." I kissed her forehead and said, "Don't be. I'll always be right here." And I meant it. I meant I would always be her safety net. But somehow that turned into me, watching her through a rearview mirror she didn't want me peering into anymore. The early days in New York were tough for her. The noise, the competitiveness, the loneliness, she called me crying more times than I could count. And I was always there. Always. Sometimes I drove up just to see her for 10 minutes between classes. She didn't know how often I slept in my car in the campus parking lot, too afraid to drive home late. But she grew out of the fear, and I didn't realize when I should have stepped back and let her stand without me. Instead, I stayed. Too long, in too many ways. Even after she got her job at the design firm, I was still packing her care boxes, soup mixes, socks, notes on yellow Post-its with hearts drawn in red pen. When she posted her first apartment photos, I commented with emojis and proud mom exclamations. Then came the first time she ignored one of my calls. I remember the sharp edge of that moment. It was ordinary, but it stung like being left out of a secret. Then it happened again, and again. I told myself she was busy, but in truth, I think she was learning how to breathe without me in her airspace. It's not like she turned cruel. No, that's not Emma. She just became cool, efficient, blunt. Her texts shortened. Her responses came late. And when I visited, she always had a client call a dinner or a sorry. Just 10 minutes, Mom. She never made me feel unwelcome, but she didn't go out of her way to make me feel needed either. One evening, she came home while I was rearranging her spice rack. She froze, then said, "Why do you always do this?" I had it the way I liked it. I mumbled an apology, but I knew I'd crossed a line I couldn't see until she pointed at it. She didn't want help anymore. She wanted boundaries. But for someone who had made a life of being the one person who always showed up, boundaries felt like banishment. So I tried to scale back. I didn't visit without asking. I tried not to text every morning. I stopped checking her weather and texting her reminders to bring an umbrella. But my worry, that never left. I was the kind of mother who still wondered if she was eating enough greens, if she was sleeping okay, if that cough she mentioned 3 weeks ago had gone away. That's why in the cafe that day when I asked if she was eating, it wasn't criticism. It was instinct. It was love, disguised as routine. But she didn't see it that way. She saw a woman who couldn't let go. and maybe she was right. Still, that didn't mean it didn't hurt. I think what people don't talk about enough is the grief of motherhood, not when they leave the house, but when they stop looking back, when they stop asking for your advice, when they stop needing you like they once did. It's a slow kind of loss, like watching the tide pull your child out to sea while you stand barefoot on the shore, wondering if the water will ever bring her back. After the brunch, I went home and stood in front of the mirror. I looked older than I remembered. Not just because of time, but because I'd used up so much of myself trying to be everything for her. And now, who was I? I picked up the phone a dozen times that week to text her, to say sorry, to say I didn't mean to hover, but each time I stopped myself. Because for the first time, I wondered, should I stop chasing her altogether? Emma's world began shifting, and I could no longer find a place to stand in it. It happened gradually. The coffee dates went from weekly to monthly. Then from monthly to, I'll let you know when I'm free. At first, I chalked it up to ambition. She was thriving, rising quickly at her design firm, her name attached to 2 luxury residential projects, invited to pitch to clients far older and richer than she was. And I was proud, fiercely, quietly proud. But I also started noticing how little I was being mentioned in her life anymore. When she introduced me to colleagues, if at all it was rushed. This is my mom, Diane. No sparkle, no warmth. As though I were a relic she brought along out of obligation. Once I overheard one of her coworkers ask, "Oh, did your mom do design too?" Emma laughed and said, "No, she's just retired. She used to be." "What was it, Mom?" I had to swallow before answering. "I was a school counselor." The woman smiled politely. Emma didn't even look back at me as they walked off. I stood there holding my purse suddenly, too aware of the cardigan I was wearing, the one she used to call my comfort sweater. Now it just made me feel invisible. Her world was sleek, fast-paced, full of muted colors and minimalist elegance. And I was not. I was warmth, texture, sentimentality. I saved old birthday cards and believed in handwritten thank you notes. I said things like, "Be careful and call me when you get there." Things that didn't belong in her curated grown-up life. Still, I tried. I bought a new phone case, sleeker. Switched to neutral nail polish. I followed her on Instagram, even liked her posts, though she never liked any of mine. I began learning the names of fonts and color palettes so I could ask about her work. But every attempt felt like knocking on a door that had been quietly closed. The next time I visited her apartment, she asked me gently not to tidy things up without asking. I apologized and sat stiffly on her expensive couch, afraid to touch the velvet throw pillows. She poured me tea and I asked her how work was. She gave me a 4-word answer and then started texting. That entire afternoon, I felt like a background actor in her life. And then came the moment that truly sealed it for me. It was at one of her work parties, a swanky rooftop affair, champagne flutes and rooftop lights, everyone in linen and designer heels. Emma had invited me, but I suspected it was more out of politeness than desire. Still, I went dressed in my best navy blazer and pearl earrings. I smiled. I tried. I stood beside her as she spoke to clients, laughing at jokes I didn't understand. But then I heard it, a whisper just behind me. A woman in her early 30s said to another guest, "That's her mom. Wow, she's really involved." They weren't trying to be cruel, but the word stung. Involved. As if it were a flaw. As if love had become an inconvenience. I pretended not to hear, but I drifted away from the crowd. I stood by the edge of the terrace, the city lights glowing below like fireflies, and wondered, what am I doing here? And more importantly, what if she doesn't even want me here? I left early. I didn't say goodbye. She didn't notice I'd gone until I texted her from the parking garage. Her reply came an hour later. "You didn't have to leave so early. Hope you got home okay." That was it. That was all. I lay in bed that night, clutching the throw pillow she gave me last Christmas. I used to think it meant something. Now I wondered if it had been just another decorative item to fit her aesthetic, soft, understated, removable. My daughter had built a life so perfectly hers, there wasn't room for someone like me anymore. Not unless I was willing to play a smaller, quieter role. And maybe I should have. Maybe I should have been content with a chair in the corner of her story, smiling and applauding from the sidelines. But I had been the center of her world for so long. It was hard to fade without grief. I remembered once when she was 5, she told me she wanted to live with me forever. Even when I'm a grandma, she had declared proudly, her gap-toothed grin shining. We were baking cookies, and I'd kissed the tip of her nose and said I'd love that. Now I could barely get an uninterrupted sentence during lunch. But what really haunted me was not that she didn't want me close anymore. It was that she didn't seem to care that I noticed. That's when I knew the shift wasn't temporary. This wasn't a phase. This was the new normal. Emma's world no longer had room for me at the table, and perhaps I needed to stop trying to squeeze in a seat, unwelcome in her success. I didn't expect her to hold my hand at the event. I didn't expect to be introduced with glowing pride or seated beside her for the whole evening. But I also didn't expect to feel like I had wandered into a party where I didn't belong, not as a guest, not even as a mother. The event was Emma's celebration, a formal gathering for the launch of her firm's latest luxury project. She had mentioned it casually over the phone weeks before. "There's this cocktail thing at the Marriott rooftop. Probably boring. You don't have to come." But I said I'd like to. She paused, then added, "Okay. If you want to. Dress nice, it's full of industry people." I should have known then. The tone. The way she didn't say I'd love for you to come. Still, I put on my best dress, a soft gray one with long sleeves, the one she used to compliment before she began preferring simpler, cleaner looks. I curled my hair softly at the ends and added a single pearl pin. When I looked in the mirror, I thought, not bad for 56. Presentable. Graceful. The venue was everything Emma's world had become: sleek lighting, abstract installations, towering glass windows reflecting the city skyline. She was in her element, wearing a pale ivory blazer dress, heels that added inches to her already tall frame, and a subtle confidence that made people gravitate toward her. I stood near the entrance, clutching a glass of white wine, watching her. She hadn't seen me yet. I overheard snippets of conversation around me. She's a design prodigy. Only 31 and already leading a team. Did you see her last project? That rooftop garden concept was genius. All praises, all earned. And yet, not a single person in the room knew how Emma used to spend hours drawing imaginary houses as a child. Windows covered in flower boxes, rooms filled with books, never fewer than 3 dogs in the backyard. I did. I remembered every one of those drawings. I'd kept some folded gently in a drawer. When Emma finally saw me, her expression didn't shift in joy. Just a faint surprise, the kind you might give an old acquaintance. She came over, gave a quick hug that didn't quite land, and said, "You found it okay?" I smiled. "Yes, you look stunning." "Thanks. I've been running around. So many people to talk to." She glanced behind her, already distracted. "Of course," I said. "I'm happy just being here." And I meant it. I thought maybe once the speeches were done, we'd share a moment. A glass of champagne. A quiet, "I'm proud of you, sweetheart." But as the evening unfolded, I was introduced to 2 people, both times as my mom, Diane. No more, no less. Not the person who believed in me when no one else did. Not the woman who raised me alone and gave me everything. Just my mom. Each time she moved through the room, she pulled further away, her eyes scanning for executives, designers, clients. I became her shadow. Not by force, but by vacancy. By not existing in her new orbit. I eventually drifted to a table at the corner of the room. I smiled at people who didn't smile back. I finished my wine slowly, and I told myself, "Don't cry. Not here. Not like this." Then came the final sting. One of her colleagues, a young man with a sharp haircut and eager energy, walked over and said, "So how do you know, Emma?" It took me a second to answer. I blinked and smiled, hoping the tightness in my throat wouldn't give me away. I'm her mother. He looked startled. Oh, wow. You look different from what I expected. She never really mentions you. He meant no harm. I know that. But that moment broke something small inside me. Not because I needed to be paraded, but because I realized I wasn't part of the story she told about herself anymore. And maybe that was her way of surviving, of becoming someone separate from me. I left before the evening ended, texted her from the elevator. Heading out now. Beautiful event. So proud of you. She replied 5 minutes later. Thanks for coming. Sorry we didn't get to talk much. That was it. No, I love you. No. Let's get dinner soon. Just a line polite distant final. As I walked out into the night air, the city felt colder than I remembered. I held onto my coat tighter, blinking against the wind. I passed couples laughing at crosswalks, tourists taking blurry selfies, and I wondered, where had I gone wrong? Was it in loving too hard, or not loosening my grip early enough? At home, I placed the wine glass I'd taken from the event, an unconscious habit, really just something to hold on to, on the kitchen counter. I stared at it for a long time. Then I washed it gently as if it were fragile and placed it on the top shelf. For days after that, I didn't reach out. I waited. I waited to see if she'd follow up, suggest we meet, say something more than just thanks. But silence stretched like a rubber band pulled too tight. No snap, no release. Just distance. And so I pulled back. Not in anger, but in exhaustion. Being unwelcome in someone's success, especially someone you helped shape, is a specific kind of heartbreak. Not loud, not public, just quiet and enduring. I didn't know it yet, but that night marked the beginning of something irreversible. She had stepped fully into her new life, and I had to begin learning how to step out of it. The day she walked away, it wasn't dramatic. There were no screaming matches, no slammed doors or broken plates, no neighbors peeking through curtains. Just a quiet Wednesday evening, a small misunderstanding. And then, the moment my daughter walked away, not just from the room, but from me. It started with lentil soup, my homemade slow-cooked recipe. She'd once begged me to freeze it in batches when she was in college. Now she pushed the bowl around with her spoon as if it were something foreign and dull. Emma had dropped by her idea, surprisingly. She texted 2 nights before, I have a meeting near your area Wednesday. I can swing by for dinner if that works. My heart had leapt. Of course it worked. I cleaned the house, polished the cutlery, washed the curtains, even though no one would notice. I wore my softest blouse, the pale green one she'd complimented years ago, and added just a dab of perfume behind my ears. When she arrived, she was glued to her phone, one foot still half turned toward the door like she wasn't planning to stay long. I tried to push past it. I served dinner, tried to catch up on her work. Her life asked the right amount of questions without tipping into nagging mother territory. But then it happened. A stupid moment. She asked for sparkling water. I handed her a glass, the bottle was already open. She took one sip and set it down. You didn't chill it. I smiled awkwardly. I thought you'd want it right away. She didn't smile back. Then she said it. Not cruelly, not even loudly, but in that clipped, exhausted tone I'd come to dread. Mom, this is what I mean. You always assume you know what I want, but you never ask. I didn't want lukewarm water. I wanted cold. I froze. It was a moment so small, so ordinary, and yet something cracked. Emma, I said quietly, I'm trying. I'm always trying. She put down her fork. That's the problem, she said, her voice suddenly tight. You're always trying to manage things, the food, the conversation, the temperature of the water. You don't realize how exhausting it is to be treated like I'm 12 years old. I stared at her, tried to find my breath. My fingers tightened slightly on the tablecloth. You think that's what I'm doing? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You think I made soup and opened water because I think you're a child, she sighed. I think you don't see me as a grown woman. You still act like you're the only one who knows what's best. I'm tired of feeling like I have to perform just to be around you. I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg her to really see how much love was packed into every gesture, how I'd never meant to control her, only to care for her. But nothing I said would have mattered. I saw it in her eyes. She had already built her wall. She stood up, grabbed her coat. Didn't even take her purse at first, she was that flustered. "I can't do this tonight," she muttered. I should have known better. I followed her to the door, heart pounding. "Emma, wait, please." She turned. Not angry, just cold. "You want me here because you miss the version of me that needed you. But I'm not her anymore, Mom. And you never made space for who I've become." The air went still. The hallway light buzzed overhead. I looked at her. My grown daughter. Sharp jawline, perfect hair, shoes that cost more than my entire grocery run. And all I could think was, when did I become someone she had to recover from? She left. No hug. No "I love you." Just the soft click of the door as it closed behind her. I stood in the hallway long after she was gone. Long after her car started. Long after her tail lights vanished from the street. The soup cooled. The silence grew thicker. And I sat down at the table alone, across from an empty chair. The same one that had once held her high school homework, her college letters, her nervous fingers during breakup talks. Now just absence. I didn't cry immediately. Grief has a strange rhythm. It tiptoes in with silence and stays long after the first tear falls. But that night, something changed in me. For years, I had been the one to call, to apologize, to chase her back after arguments because I believed that's what mothers do. You bend, you adapt, you love even when it cuts. But this time, I didn't move. I didn't send a follow-up message. I didn't check if she got home safe. I didn't ask if we could talk things through. I just sat in the quiet, and I listened not to the absence of her voice, but to the presence of my own weariness. Maybe she needed space, maybe she needed time, but for the first time I realized so did I. Being a mother had consumed every part of me. Even when she didn't want my help, I had made myself available. Even when she rejected it, I still showed up. But that night, the rejection wasn't gentle. It was complete. And I finally understood you cannot force someone to see the love they've grown blind to, and you cannot keep watering a relationship that only grows thorns. So I stood up. I turned off the lights. And I whispered aloud to the empty kitchen, "I let you go, Emma. Not because I stopped loving you, but because I finally realized I don't know how to keep holding someone who keeps pushing me away." Weeks of silence. After Emma walked out that night, the silence didn't just settle in, it rooted itself deep in the walls, in the floorboards, in the creases of the sofa where she used to sit with her knees tucked up like a child. I didn't hear from her the next day, or the day after. I didn't text her either. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I had the energy to reach out and hear nothing back. You don't realize how much of your identity is wrapped up in someone else until they start pulling away. For 31 years, I'd built my life around her rhythms, her school, her friends, her heartbreaks, her ambitions. I was the one she called for everything. And now, nothing. The house was quieter than usual. Not a peaceful quiet, but the kind that presses in on you like being underwater. I filled the space with movement, dusting shelves, rearranging the spice rack, pruning the potted plants, anything to keep my hands busy while my mind begged for noise. I even took up walking. Every morning, same path past the bakery where I used to buy her favorite rolls, through the park where she used to ride her bike, past the corner bench where I once waited while she was at piano lessons. Everything seemed to echo with "used to." One afternoon, I passed a young mother with her little girl on a scooter. The girl fell. Not hard, just enough to skin her knee. She cried. The mother swooped down, kissed her forehead, and whispered something soothing. The child wrapped her arms around her neck like it was the only thing that mattered. I turned away, and I wept. Not loudly, just a soft, aching kind of grief, the kind that rises not from the moment, but from everything buried beneath it. I didn't miss Emma the adult. I missed the little girl who ran into my arms when I waited at the school gates. the teenager who curled up next to me on the couch when storms frightened her, the college student who used to text me during finals. Mom reminded me I'm not a failure. She used to need me. Now she barely remembered I existed. By the second week, I tried to busy myself with other people. I called my friend Elaine we met for lunch. She talked about her cruise, her new grandchild, her knee surgery. I smiled, nodded, even laughed in the right places. But the whole time I kept glancing at my phone, waiting, hoping, nothing. That night I laid in bed and scrolled back through our old messages, birthdays, inside jokes, photos she used to send of her coffee cups and outfit choices asking me, does this work? Now there were no new messages, just an endless scroll of what once was. It was in week 3 that I realized something vital. My silence wasn't a strategy. It wasn't a manipulation. It was a boundary. A line drawn not in anger but in self-preservation. Because what Emma didn't seem to understand was that I had feelings too. Mothers do. We bleed, we ache, and we can break. Just because I was older, just because I'd spent a lifetime holding her up, didn't mean I was unshakable. Her words in the kitchen that night had haunted me. You never made space for who I've become. I thought about that sentence every night, and I started to ask myself, had she ever made space for who I am now? She saw me as someone fixed, the overbearing mom, the one who overcooked, overcared, overstepped. But had she ever stopped to ask who I was outside of being her mother? She didn't know I loved jazz, that I'd started painting again, that I sometimes watched documentaries and wrote notes in the margins of old notebooks because I missed the feeling of learning. She didn't know because she never asked, because when she was ready to grow, she believed I had to shrink. And I let her. Week 4 came and went. I stopped waiting. I started waking up without checking my phone first. Started walking without rerouting past places that reminded me of her. Started reading again full novels, not just advice columns. I even went to a pottery class. It was messy. My bowl came out lopsided. But I laughed out loud with other women my age who weren't afraid of being seen as too much or not enough. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. One afternoon I came home and found a message from Elaine. You seemed lighter today. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I stared at that message for a long time, because Elaine didn't know the truth. The truth was I'd started grieving Emma, not her death, but the version of her I once knew. The version who looked at me with admiration, not exhaustion. The version who called me first, who once said, "You're my whole world, Mom." And grieving her letting that version go was allowing me to rediscover someone else. Me. Not Diane the mother, just Diane. That woman had been buried under years of devotion, but she was still here, a little bent maybe, but not broken. By week 5, I'd deleted our last text thread. Not out of anger, out of clarity. I didn't need the breadcrumbs anymore. I wasn't wandering lost in the forest. I'd found my own path. That night, I lit a candle. I cooked a small dinner just for myself. And as I ate, I didn't feel lonely. I felt peaceful. Then the phone buzzed. A message from Emma. Just one line. Are you okay? I stared at it, not sure whether to laugh, cry, or ignore it completely. I didn't answer right away, because I needed to ask myself truly, was I okay? And for the first time, without hesitation, I realized the answer was yes. I was okay. Not whole, not healed, but okay. And that was something. When I stopped calling, it wasn't a declaration. There was no announcement or drawn line. I didn't wake up and say I will no longer reach out to my daughter. It just happened. Like a leaf falling from a tree after holding on too long, quiet, inevitable, with the kind of grace that only comes from surrender. For so long, I had been the one to initiate contact. Birthdays, holidays, ordinary Wednesdays. I texted reminders, sent links to articles. I thought she'd love photos of the sky when it looked particularly beautiful. But at some point, I realized she wasn't replying out of joy anymore, only out of duty. I could hear it in the rhythm of her texts, one-word replies, delayed responses, sometimes none at all. The last message I sent her before I stopped was a simple photo of a book I'd found in a thrift store, A House for Mr. Biswas, the same novel she had to read in her college literature class. She hated it back then. I remember her groaning through every chapter. I texted with the photo. "Look what I found. Thought of you. Funny how we grow into the things we once hated." No reply, not even a heart reaction. And that's when the quiet began. At first, the silence was unbearable. I kept checking my phone, kept unlocking it like a compulsion as though I could will her to think of me. But after a few days, the urge softened. After a week, it dulled. And by the second week, it became background noise, always there, but no longer screaming. There's something oddly liberating about stopping. When you stop calling, you also stop bracing. You stop flinching every time the phone buzzes, only to find it's a spam call or a bank notification. You stop performing small acts of affection just to be acknowledged. Instead, I began reclaiming that energy. I made new routines. I started baking again, not her favorites, but mine. I even subscribed to a local lecture series at the community center. The first talk was about post-war American art. I didn't understand half of it, but I took notes anyway. I felt awake. I knew what some people would say, that I was being petty, that as a mother I should keep trying. But those people didn't know what it felt like to love someone who makes you feel like you're always asking for too much, even when all you're asking for is their time. It was never about control, never about making her dependent on me. It was about presence, mutual care, reciprocity. But Emma had built her adult life like a fortress. Walls of ambition, doors guarded by busy schedules, windows closed tightly with independence. And I'd spent so long knocking, I forgot I had my own house to return to. One morning, I sat on the porch with my coffee, watching the sun stretch across the trees. The birds were loud. My neighbor's dog barked at nothing. A child across the street was drawing with chalk. And I felt for the first time in months content, not euphoric, not thrilled, just settled. I no longer felt like I was waiting. Later that week, I got a call from an old friend, Gloria, from my counseling days. We hadn't spoken in years, but she'd seen my name on a community volunteer list. We met for coffee. We talked about old students' life after retirement, the weird loneliness that creeps in when no one needs your advice anymore. She said something I'll never forget. "You know, I think people forget that we mothers don't stop growing just because our children do." That stayed with me. Because I had spent so long mourning the distance between Emma and me, I hadn't allowed myself to imagine that I still had more to live for, more to discover, more to feel. It was around this time that Emma texted again. 3 weeks after her last message. "Just checking in. Been swamped at work. Hope you're doing okay." I read it. I stared at it. And I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because for the first time I asked myself a hard question. Was I okay? And the answer was mostly yes. I was beginning to know who I was when no one was calling me mom. I was starting to like the quiet. I was filling my calendar not with errands for others, but with plans for myself. In some small way, I was healing. And here's the irony. It wasn't until I stopped calling that Emma finally noticed the silence. 2 days after her message, she called. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail. "Hi, it's me. I just realized we haven't talked in a while. I feel bad about that. Just call me if you want to. No pressure." If you want to, no pressure. It almost made me laugh. How many years had I carried the pressure? How many times had I adjusted, softened, waited? Now she felt the absence. And I felt not triumphant but strong, quietly strong. I played her voicemail again that night. And I didn't cry. I just sat with it. Like holding a stone in your palm, cool, solid, real. I knew we weren't done. I knew the story wasn't over. But for once, I wasn't rushing to flip the page. I was letting it unfold. On the last Sunday of that month, I stood in my kitchen peeling an orange. The sun was pouring in. The wind outside rattled the blinds just slightly. And I thought to myself, this is what peace feels like. It's not loud. It's not a reunion. It's not even forgiveness. It's the stillness you earn when you finally choose yourself after decades of choosing everyone else. The Thanksgiving no one called. It was the first Thanksgiving I'd ever spent completely alone. No family, no friends, no phone call, not even a text. I woke up that morning with the sound of birds outside and a strange stillness inside, a kind of hollowness that comes not from pain, but from absence. It wasn't even raining. It was a bright, clear morning. Crisp air, golden leaves. I used to love Thanksgiving. The scent of roasted garlic and thyme. Emma sitting at the kitchen island sneaking pieces of pie crust when she thought I wasn't looking. We had our own traditions, watching old movies while the turkey rested, lighting the candle on the dining table only after we'd named one thing we were grateful for. For years it had been just the two of us, and that was always enough. Now even those memories felt expired. Like a carton of cream pushed too far to the back of the fridge. That morning I pulled out my recipe box anyway, out of habit, maybe even out of denial. I held the index card labeled Emma's sweet potato mash, the corners smudged with cinnamon from a decade ago. I stared at it until the ink blurred, not from age, but from my tears. I could have called her. I could have sent one simple message, "Happy Thanksgiving, my girl," but I didn't. Because this time I wanted to see if she would remember, if she would reach for me, if I mattered not out of duty, but out of love. No call came, no text. Not even a reposted Instagram story that said grateful for my mom. Nothing. She had vanished into her own celebration, a new world with new people, and I had no place at that table anymore. I sat at mine, staring at the single plate I'd set out just in case. I hadn't cooked anything elaborate, just scrambled eggs and toast. It was too quiet. The television stayed off. The phone stayed still. And I sat not bitter, but bone-tired. By afternoon, I took a walk. The streets were oddly empty. Every window I passed seemed to glow with other people's happiness. Families gathered, clinking glasses, children's laughter leaking out through half-open doors. I passed the house with the red shutters, the one where the Carsons lived. I saw them all on their porch taking a group photo. Grandparents, kids, cousins. A sea of warmth I didn't belong to. One of the grandkids noticed me and waved. I waved back, forcing a smile. But inside something ached. Not because I wasn't invited, but because somewhere my daughter was celebrating too, and I wasn't even a footnote in her day. That night I returned home and made tea. I curled up on the couch with a blanket. I didn't cry. But I did allow myself to whisper the question I'd been avoiding all day. Is she ever going to come back to me? And then a harder one. Would I still want her to, if she only does because she feels guilty? That question lingered long after the tea went cold. Around 10 p.m. my phone finally buzzed. My heart jumped. I snatched it off the table like someone gasping for air. But it wasn't her. It was my bank. A holiday fraud alert. False alarm. I put the phone face down. And in that moment something hardened in me. Not anger, but resolve. I could no longer keep stretching myself across an emotional tightrope, always trying to balance between being available and being ignored. I needed a new kind of peace, one that didn't rely on someone else remembering me. The next morning, I took down the fall decorations early. I packed away the little turkey figurine Emma had made in second grade. I folded the gold napkins we used every year. And I placed everything into a storage box labeled "Maybe Next Year," though I didn't believe it. And then I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I booked a trip. A small coastal town. 3 hours away. Nothing fancy, just a weekend retreat with a tiny cabin and an ocean view. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't post about it. I just went. The salt air hit my face like a rebirth. I sat on a rocky cliff with a journal and wrote things I hadn't dared speak aloud. I am not just someone's mother. I am not just someone's afterthought. I am whole, even if someone forgets I exist. Those words felt radical, even selfish, but also true. In the silence of that weekend, I rediscovered how much space my own heart could hold when it wasn't crushed by disappointment. I went to a small local bookstore, had clam chowder at a cafe where no one knew my name, and watched the waves with my fingers buried in the pockets of a coat I hadn't worn in years. And I smiled. Not because I had moved on, not because I had healed, but because I was finally doing something without waiting for someone else's permission or presence. When I returned home, the first thing I did was check my phone. Still no message from Emma. No apology. No happy Thanksgiving, sorry I forgot. Just the same stillness. And yet, for the first time, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt awake. Because the truth is, people only treat you as disposable when you keep proving you'll always come back. I had stopped proving that. And maybe that was the first real act of love I'd given to myself in years. A sudden illness. It started with dizziness. Nothing dramatic, just a strange lightheadedness one morning while watering the garden. I brushed it off as dehydration, drank a glass of water, sat down, and promised myself I'd take it easier that day. But the next morning, it happened again. And again, 2 days later. Then came the fatigue, a bone-deep exhaustion I couldn't explain. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was trying to be brave, but because I didn't know who to tell. Emma hadn't called in weeks. I hadn't called her either. There was no one else close enough to notice. So I said nothing. I told myself it would pass, that it was probably seasonal, that I was just getting older. But by the end of that week, I couldn't ignore the chest tightness, the sudden sweats. The moment I stood in the shower, blinked, and had to grip the wall to stay upright. I made an appointment. Not with the emergency room, I wasn't ready to admit something might be seriously wrong, but with my old general practitioner, a woman I trusted. Dr. Harris took one look at me and frowned. "You don't look like yourself, Diane. Let's run some tests. Blood work, EKG, blood pressure high, liver function, iron levels, heart rhythm." By the next morning, her office called, "We'd like you to come back in. Today, if possible." My fingers went cold around the phone. The results weren't catastrophic, but they weren't good either. An irregular heartbeat, a potassium imbalance, signs of early heart strain, maybe stress, maybe something more. Dr. Harris looked me in the eye and said, "I think you've been ignoring your body for a while. This didn't start last week." She wasn't wrong. I had poured so much of myself into keeping up emotionally that I hadn't noticed how my body had begun falling behind. The weight of worry, grief, and loneliness, it had finally begun to show up in my cells. "Are you living alone?" she asked. I nodded. "Do you have support?" Another nod. A lie. I went home and sat on the edge of my bed holding the printed report in my hands. A list of numbers and terms I barely understood highlighted in yellow. For the first time in this long drawn-out silence between Emma and me, I asked a question I hadn't dared before. If I collapsed tomorrow, would she even know? Not because she didn't love me deep down, I believed she still did, but because she wasn't looking anymore. She wasn't paying attention. She had turned her back on the version of me that was still standing there, arms open. And so I made a decision. A quiet, selfish one. I would not tell her. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted to test something. To see how long it would take her to notice, to wonder, to care. I began logging the days again. Not obsessively, just noting them in the corners of my planner. Day 1, blood results. Fatigue. Still no message. Day 3, she posted a photo of brunch with coworkers, grateful for strong women. Day 5, my chest felt tight all morning, took a long nap. Still no call. Day 7, she commented on Elaine's daughter's wedding post. Nothing to me. Day 10, I gave up. I stopped waiting. I cooked smaller meals, sat with a hot compress on my back most evenings, walked a little slower, took more breaks between chores. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't faint in public or end up in an ambulance, but it was enough to know something was wrong, and I lived with that knowledge alone. Every time the phone buzzed, my heart quickened just in case, but it was never her. Not until day 13. That night, just before 10 p.m., a text came in. "Hey, I had a weird dream about you. Are you okay? I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it. Part of me wanted to answer with the full truth. No, I'm not okay. You just stopped noticing, but I didn't. I put the phone down and went to bed. She called the next morning. I let it ring out. She called again an hour later. Voicemail. Hey, you're probably busy or sleeping. I don't know. I guess I haven't heard from you. And I'm realizing that maybe I've taken that for granted. That last sentence hung in the air. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing I'd heard in months that sounded like recognition. The next evening, she showed up. No warning, no text. Just the sound of her car in the driveway and a knock at the door. I opened it, and there she was, tired, tense, holding her phone like a shield. She looked at me like she didn't know what to say, as if she didn't know where to begin, as if she hadn't realized I'd been disappearing too, just more quietly. I stepped aside, let her in. The house smelled of lavender cleaner and overripe bananas. I hadn't been expecting company. Emma walked into the living room and paused. You've changed things. She was right. I had moved furniture, put up new curtains. There were fewer photos of her on the shelves now, not out of spite, but because I was making room for other parts of my life. I nodded. I guess I needed the space. She didn't respond right away. She walked around like she was trying to recognize something familiar, not just in the house, but in me. She looked at me carefully. You look tired. I sat down, looked her in the eyes. I am. Silence. She sat across from me, and for the first time in what felt like years, her voice softened. Are you okay? I took a long breath, and I said simply, I've been better. She frowned. Why didn't you tell me? And I answered with the truth. Because you didn't ask. A message too late. Emma stared at me as if I'd just spoken a foreign language. Because I didn't ask, she repeated like she needed to hear it again to believe it. I nodded calmly. Not to punish her, not to accuse, just to lay down the truth between us like a glass pane, clear, fragile, and not meant to be stepped over without care. She looked down at her hands, twisting the strap of her purse around her fingers. I didn't know something was wrong. That's exactly it, Emma, I said gently. You didn't know. And for the past few months, you haven't tried to. She blinked hard. I saw the shine of tears gathering at the edges, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. You could have told me, she said, voice tight. You could have called. I didn't flinch. I have spent years calling Emma, checking, worrying, showing up. You've spent years pushing me back piece by piece. I finally stopped calling, not to punish you, but to survive you. She swallowed hard. I could see the war on her face, pride and guilt, shame and confusion, all clashing like waves inside her. I let the silence fill the room. This wasn't about winning. This was about truth. And truth, when spoken softly, cuts deeper than a scream. What's been going on? She finally asked. Are you sick? I stood up slowly, walked to the side table, and pulled out the folded test results. I didn't hand them to her. I just laid them on the coffee table between us. She picked them up, read slowly. Her fingers trembled slightly. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? I met her eyes, because I needed to know whether you would notice, whether I still mattered to you without me waving my hands in front of your face, begging for attention. You do matter, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her gently. Then why have you treated me like a burden you forgot to set down? She winced visibly. The words hit. And for the first time in months, maybe years, she didn't try to defend herself. She sat back, holding the papers like they were burning her hands. Her voice cracked. I didn't mean to. I didn't realize. I thought you were always going to be there, Mom. Like you always were. That's the problem, I said softly. You assumed I'd always be here no matter how little you gave in return. Emma looked away. Her face flushed with something between shame and fear. I've been so wrapped up in work, in proving myself. I thought I was doing what you wanted, being independent, being successful, not needing to lean on anyone. I never wanted you to not lean, I said. I wanted you to fly, but not forget the ground you came from, not forget me. She reached for a tissue, wiped at her face quickly as if tears were something to be embarrassed about. "Why didn't I see this?" she whispered. I softened. "Because I was too good at hiding it. At making it easy for you to forget that I'm human too." There it was, the weight of the years finally finding shape in words. We sat in it together. No yelling, no accusations, just the quiet truth sitting between us. She exhaled. "I don't know how to fix this." I nodded slowly. "You can't fix everything overnight. But you can begin." She looked at me the way she used to look when she was small, and scared when she scraped her knees or lost her place during a school recital. "I want to begin," she said. "I really do." And just like that, something shifted. Not dramatically, but like a window cracking open on a stale room. We sat together on the couch for the first time in what felt like years. I poured us both tea. She didn't pick up her phone once. She asked how I'd been feeling. I told her honestly. She offered to take me to my next doctor's appointment. I accepted. But it wasn't just about the appointment. It was about the gesture, the reaching back. Later that night after she left, I sat in the same living room and allowed myself a few quiet tears. Not because I was sad, not because I was angry, but because I finally felt seen. Emma had begun to see me not just as mom, but as a woman, a person. Someone who could get sick, feel lonely, ache for care, and not just give it. And in that moment, I realized something. Love cannot survive indefinitely on assumption. It has to be fed, checked on, watered like a garden, and sometimes, like now, rescued before it withers completely. The next day, she texted me, "I made you a calendar of your meds and checkups. I'll come with you Wednesday. Is that okay?" I smiled. Typed back, "That's more than okay. Thank you." She replied with a heart emoji. Simple, but after everything monumental. That night I slept deeply. No tossing. No waiting for the phone to ring. No rehearsing the next thing I needed to say. Because sometimes a message comes too late to stop the ache, but just in time to stop the damage from becoming permanent. The visit. The following Wednesday, I stood at my bedroom mirror adjusting the collar of my coat for the 5th time. My hair wouldn't sit right. My hands felt too cold. I hadn't worn makeup in weeks, but today I dabbed on a little tinted moisturizer and brushed my cheeks with color. Just enough to not look sick. I kept glancing out the window. Emma had texted, "Be there at 10 sharp. Don't worry, I'll drive." It was the first time she'd offered something concrete in months, not a vague, "Let me know if you need anything." Not a passive hope you're feeling okay, but an actual commitment. And as much as I wanted to stay calm, I felt a swirl of nerves in my stomach. When her car pulled into the driveway, I watched through the blinds for a second before heading out. She stepped out in a crisp navy coat holding a travel mug in one hand and car keys in the other. "Hi, Mom," she said. Just that. No warm hug, no awkward apology. But her voice was soft, unsure maybe, and I knew that counted for something. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, climbing into the passenger seat. The car smelled like cinnamon and leather. She had a playlist on low volume, some instrumental piano, nothing too emotional. It felt like she'd planned for this moment to be neutral, steady, controlled. As we drove, she asked how I'd been sleeping, if I'd eaten breakfast, whether I was feeling any dizzy spells lately. It was strange hearing those questions from her. Not because they were unfamiliar, I had asked them of her for years, but because she was asking them now, to me. I answered honestly, not downplaying, not dramatizing. And for the first time in a long while, she really listened. At the clinic, she insisted on coming into the exam room. Sat quietly in the corner chair, hands folded, watching as the nurse checked my blood pressure and reviewed notes. When Dr. Harris entered, she raised her eyebrows. "And who do we have here today?" "My daughter," I said. And I realized I hadn't said that aloud to anyone in a long time. Emma stood, extended her hand. "Emma, I'm here to make sure she doesn't downplay anything." Dr. Harris smiled. "Well, she's good at that." Emma nodded, half smiling. "I'm starting to see that." The appointment went well. My numbers were stable, but I needed to continue the new medication and come in for monthly checkups. Dr. Harris gently reminded me about managing stress, about not keeping things in. Emma sat beside me taking notes on her phone. After we left, we stopped by a little cafe she chose. Not trendy or sterile, just a cozy place with a fireplace and mismatched mugs. She ordered a pot of mint tea and a slice of cranberry orange loaf. Then, without prompting, she pushed half of the slice toward me. "You used to like this, right?" I looked at her. "You remember?" She nodded, eyes on her spoon. "You used to bring it home from that bakery near the school. You'd say it was too sweet for you, but you always ate the edges." That memory settled between us like warmth. We sat in silence for a moment. Then she said, "It was strange being in your house again." I looked up. "Why?" She thought for a long second. "Because it didn't feel like my house anymore. It used to, even after I moved out. But this time, it felt like I was visiting someone I didn't know as well as I thought I did." I stirred my tea. "Maybe because you hadn't visited in a long time." "I know," she said, her voice low. "And I'm sorry for that." It was the first apology I'd heard in years. It didn't come dressed in excuses or defense. Just 7 words. I looked at her, this woman I raised, and for a moment I saw not the daughter who had pushed me away, but the child who used to sleep with her hand wrapped around my pinky finger when she was sick. She didn't cry. Neither did I. But something softened. "When I came to see you last week, she said I was scared." I tilted my head. "Of what?" "That you'd be mad. That I'd find you worse than I imagined. That I wouldn't know how to fix it." "You don't have to fix it," I said. "You just have to show up." She nodded. I didn't know how much damage I'd done by staying away. I let that sit. Not to make her stew in it, but because the silence between us had carried too many unsaid things, and now they needed to be named. "I think," I said slowly, "you got so good at proving you didn't need anyone. You forgot how to be with the people who love you." She wiped her mouth gently with the napkin. "I think you're right." And I think, she added, "you got so used to being the one who gave everything, you forgot how to ask for anything." That caught me. I blinked. She looked at me kindly. "You don't have to do everything alone, Mom. Not anymore. You're allowed to need someone too." That moment, it was the first time I felt our relationship leveling. No longer one giving and the other taking, but 2 women across a table, both flawed, both still learning. We talked more about little things at first. Books, her job. Then deeper things, my loneliness. Her pressure to make it, our fear of being disappointments to each other. I kept thinking she said that if I stayed away I'd feel freer. But instead, I just felt adrift. I smiled faintly. "It's hard to anchor yourself when you've cut all the ropes." She reached across the table. Not dramatically, just lightly, her fingers brushing mine. "I don't want to drift anymore." The drive back was quiet. Not tense. Just thoughtful. When we pulled into the driveway, she parked and looked at the house. "You've changed the curtains." I smiled. "Changed a lot of things. Can I see?" We walked inside together. I showed her the rearranged shelves, the new photos on the walls. Not all of her. Some of me hiking, painting, even a silly photo Elaine had taken of me, wearing a garden hat too big for my head. She looked around and said, "You've built a whole life here without me in it." "I had to," I said gently. She nodded, but then looked at me. "Can I be part of it again?" That question, it undid me. So simple. So childlike, in the best way. I didn't answer with words. I opened my arms. She stepped in. This time the hug was real, tight, long, no pretense. And in that moment, I wasn't just her mother. I was her home, and she was mine. The truth I never said. The next visit wasn't about doctors or tea or catching up. It was just Emma knocking on the door on a quiet Saturday morning, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, holding a bag of groceries. "I brought stuff to cook," she said. "Figured I owed you more than just a slice of cafe loaf." I smiled, surprised, not just by her effort, but by how casual she made it. Not performative, not obligatory, just her choosing to be here. Inside, she moved through the kitchen like she used to, but slower, her eyes scanning shelves, double-checking where I now kept the olive oil and herbs. Some things had changed. Some hadn't. "You swapped the sugar and flour jars," she noted. Helps me reach better. These wrists aren't what they used to be. She turned to look at me like she was seeing those wrists for the first time. The veins, the loose skin, the softness of age that I had once tried to hide behind long sleeves. She nodded once, didn't speak. We cooked together in silence chicken and roasted potatoes steamed greens. Simple. The kind of meal that used to fill both our stomachs and our hearts. When we sat down to eat, it was still quiet, but not uncomfortable. She took a bite, smiled. Still the best roast chicken I've ever had. You haven't been eating much, have you? I asked gently. She shrugged. Takeout and stress. Not the healthiest combination. Then she looked up. But I've been better lately. Sleeping more. Thinking more. I waited. She swallowed. About us. I placed my fork down, folded my hands in my lap, and waited. She took a breath. I think I was afraid that if I leaned on you as an adult, it would mean I hadn't grown, that I hadn't made it. I thought needing you made me weak. My eyes stung, but I didn't interrupt her. And when I did push you away, she continued, I told myself it was what I needed to become the person I was trying to be. But the truth is, I didn't just push you away, I erased you. That word, erased. It landed hard, and I know I can't take that back. She looked at me, her voice cracking. I want you to know that it wasn't because you weren't good enough, or because you did anything wrong. I reached across the table, held her hand. I know, Emma, but it still hurt. She nodded quickly, her throat tight. I know it did. And I'm so sorry. Silence stretched between us, heavy but healing. And then, for the first time in all these months, I said the thing I had carried in my chest like a stone. I was scared too. She looked up. Of what? Of becoming irrelevant, I whispered. Of loving you so much that I forgot who I was. And then realizing you didn't need me anymore. Not even a little. It felt like I'd spent my whole life building a house that you outgrew. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. So I kept going. When you told me to stop caring for you like you were a child, it wasn't the words that hurt. It was that you couldn't see I was still caring because I didn't know how to stop. Because that's what love became for me, habit instinct. You were my world for so long. I didn't realize that the center of my gravity had shifted and I didn't have anything else to orbit. A tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. I reached for my water, took a slow sip. But I've been learning, I added. Learning that I'm more than just your mother. That I deserve love that comes back to me. That I'm allowed to ask for it. Emma whispered, You always deserve that. I nodded. Then please show me now. That sentence, soft, simple, landed like a plea and a promise all at once. She got up, came around the table, and wrapped her arms around me. It was the kind of hug we hadn't shared in years, full-bodied, clumsy, tight. I love you, Mom, she whispered. I love you too, I replied, burying my face into her shoulder. I never stopped. We stayed like that for a long time. When we finally pulled apart, she sat beside me on the couch, leaning into my shoulder. I don't know how to make up for everything she said, but I want to try. I want to call you. Visit. Be present. You don't have to do it all at once, I said gently. Just don't disappear again. She smiled, faint but real. Then she looked down and said something I never expected. Sometimes I resented you even when I needed you. I hated how much I still wanted your approval. Your voice in my head. It made me feel weak. I nodded slowly. That's not weakness, Emma. That's just love with its hands tied behind its back. She leaned into me again, and this time we didn't need to say anything more. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. We watched an old movie. She helped me fold laundry. We laughed, really laughed about the time she tried to dye her hair pink in high school and turned it orange instead. And somewhere between the folding and the laughter, I felt the past begin to loosen its grip. Not erased, but softened. Like bruises that had finally stopped aching. Before she left, she turned at the door and said, I want to start showing up. Not just for you, but for myself. Because I miss you. And I miss the version of me who wasn't afraid to love you fully. I stepped onto the porch with her, watched her get into her car. She waved as she backed out of the driveway, and I waved back. When the car disappeared down the road, I looked up at the sky. It was soft gray, no sun but no storm. And I thought maybe this is what healing looks like. Not fireworks, not epiphanies. Just two people who finally saw each other again and decided not to look away. Cracks in her confidence. The next few weeks felt like watching spring unfold after a long frozen winter. Not everything bloomed at once. Some days still felt cold. But there was light now, and movement. Emma began texting more regularly. Not just with updates, but with questions. Real ones. Do you remember the name of that author I used to like? What did we use to season the sweet potatoes on Thanksgiving? Do you think it's too soon to say something to my manager about being overwhelmed? That last one caught me by surprise. It wasn't a question she would have asked before, not when she was in full career climb mode. But now, there was a tremble in it. A quiet admission that the girl who once tried to outgrow me might finally be realizing she still needed a hand to hold. When she came over for dinner the following Friday, I noticed it right away, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she moved slower like she'd been carrying something heavy all day. I didn't ask at first. I just served the soup, poured the wine, and waited. Midway through the meal, she put her spoon down and stared into her bowl. "Can I tell you something?" "Always." She twisted the napkin in her lap. "I made a mistake. At work. A big one." I stayed quiet. I misjudged a budget. Missed something in the design brief. The client was furious. I had to sit in a room with my boss and listen to her explain how disappointed she was. I haven't felt that small since high school. I reached across the table, touched her wrist. "You're human." She looked up, her eyes shining. I didn't think I was allowed to be. That sentence broke something open in me. Because I knew that feeling all too well, the invisible contract women make with the world: be perfect or be nothing. "You are. You always were," I said. "And you never had to earn my love with perfection." She took a deep breath. "That's not how it felt growing up." My chest tightened. "Emma." "No," she said gently. "I don't mean you pushed me. I pushed myself. But I think I was always watching you, how you did everything, how you held it all together. Even when Dad left. Even when we had nothing. You never cracked. I think I thought love meant being unbreakable." That silence returned not empty but full. Full of memories, regrets, truths neither of us had dared say aloud. I leaned back in my chair. "I did crack," I admitted. "You just didn't see it. I cracked in the bathroom at night, in the car, before job interviews, in the grocery aisle when I didn't know how I'd pay for all the items in my cart. But I never let you see it because I thought, if I looked broken, you'd feel unsafe." She whispered, "I think I would have felt less alone if I had." That stunned me. "Less alone." She nodded. "I always thought there was something wrong with me, that I couldn't handle pressure the way you did, that I wasn't strong enough. But now I see. I just didn't know that you were breaking too." Quietly, I got up, walked to the side cabinet, pulled out an old tin box, dented, scratched, filled with memories. Inside were letters I wrote to myself during her teenage years. Prayers, pleas, unsent messages, journal pages filled with doubt, pain, loneliness. I handed it to her. She opened the lid, read one note aloud. "I yelled at her today." She slammed the door. "I hate how we ended the day. I'm so tired, but I feel like I don't deserve rest. I wish someone would mother me just for 1 hour." Emma froze. Her eyes welled up. "You wrote these—" "I didn't know where else to put the pain," I said softly. "So I put it there." She kept reading, page after page. And with each one, something softened in her face. The armor she'd worn for years began to slip. And what I saw underneath wasn't weakness, it was truth. "I wish I had known," she whispered. "You weren't supposed to," I said. "Not then. But now. Now you're old enough to know I wasn't perfect. And that's okay. You don't have to be either." She folded the papers carefully, closed the box, held it against her chest. "I spent years trying to prove I was strong enough to not need you, but all that did was make me feel weaker." I moved beside her on the couch, put my arm around her shoulder. She rested her head against me like she hadn't done in a decade. You know, I said when you were little you used to say you wanted to be tough like Mom. I never realized that meant you felt like you couldn't fall apart. I still feel that, she said. Even now. At work. In relationships. Like if I ask for help I'll lose everything I've built. Then maybe it's time to rebuild, I said. With softer bricks. She let out a choked laugh. I think I want that. We sat there in the quiet for a long time. Later that evening she helped me fold laundry. We watched a movie not because we needed to fill space but because it felt easy again. Before she left she hugged me tight. Longer than usual. Thank you for showing me, she whispered. Thank you for staying long enough to see. She pulled back. I don't want to be someone who only calls when I'm scared. Then don't, I said. Call when you're happy too. She promised she would. And as I watched her car disappear down the road, I realized something beautiful. She hadn't returned to me out of guilt. She'd returned because she saw me again, and in turn saw herself more clearly. Sometimes it takes watching your hero stumble to realize you don't have to be flawless to be loved. Emma had spent years trying to become invincible. But now in her cracks she had found something far better: connection. And for the first time in a long while, we were both ready to let the light in through those cracks together. The bridge between us. We didn't speak every day. We didn't fall into some romanticized movie-like rhythm of mother and daughter suddenly inseparable. But what we built in those weeks was real, slow, deliberate, tender. Like mending lace with trembling fingers, careful not to pull too hard, careful not to leave the holes untouched. Emma started coming over on Sundays. Sometimes with groceries, sometimes empty-handed, sometimes just for tea and silence. She brought her laptop once and worked quietly at my dining table while I did my crossword puzzle nearby. We didn't talk much that day, but we were in the same room, and that meant something. One afternoon, she handed me a new mug, cream-colored with a tiny engraving on the side, "You are not invisible." I held it in my hands, tracing the letters with my thumb. "It's silly," she said quickly. "I saw it in a bookstore and thought of you." "It's not silly," I replied. "It's perfect." She smiled, not wide, not flashy, just a small softened curve of the mouth. The kind of smile she used to give me when she was a child and didn't have words yet for what she was feeling. That mug sits on my kitchen shelf now. I don't drink from it. I don't need to. Just seeing it is enough. One Sunday we baked together. It had been years. Emma took over the measurements like she always did, precise, impatient, with my pinch of this, splash of that methods. She laughed when I spilled flour on my shirt. I laughed when she accidentally dropped an egg on the floor. "We're a mess," she said, grinning. "A beautiful one," I said. And it was true. We were rebuilding something from broken pieces, and the shape it was taking wasn't the same as before. It was better. It had space now. Space for truth. Space for silence. Space for change. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sky turn peach and blue, she said something I'll never forget. "I used to think I had to choose between being my own person and being your daughter." I turned to her, surprised. "And now," she shrugged, "now I realize I can be both. I just didn't know how to balance it before." "And now you do." "I'm learning," she said. "But it's easier when you're not trying to fix me all the time." I smiled. "And it's easier when you don't treat me like I'm broken, just because I love you deeply." We both laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was true. Because for years we had been speaking in mismatched languages. Her independence felt like rejection. My care felt like control. But now we were translating, line by line, word by word. We took a walk together that night. Past the elementary school she once attended. Past the ice cream shop that still sold her favorite flavor. She reached for my arm, hooked it into hers. A quiet gesture. No words, but I nearly wept. At the corner of Maple and 6th, where we used to stop every Friday on the way home from school, we sat on the bench. A little older, a little softer. The air smelled of grass and pavement and possibility. "You used to sit here and cry when I made you leave the playground," I reminded her. "And you used to bribe me with gummy bears," she said, laughing. I looked at her. Really looked. You know, I said I used to think I failed you, that all the love I gave still wasn't enough to keep you close. She blinked slowly. You didn't fail. I just needed to find my way. And part of that meant pulling away. But it never meant I stopped needing you. I just didn't know how to need you without feeling like I was giving up some part of myself. And now I think, needing you is the most honest thing I've felt in a long time. The wind brushed past us gently. A child rode by on a scooter. An old man waved from across the street. And we sat there, two women who had once been everything to each other, learning how to be something new. Before we left that bench, she pulled out her phone. Can I take a picture? Of what I asked. Of us. Here, now. I hesitated. I didn't like the way I looked these days. Too many lines. Tired eyes. But she tilted her head, smiled gently. You look like someone I trust. So we took the photo. And it wasn't perfect. But it was real. Later that night, she texted me the picture. Underneath it, she wrote, "This is what building a bridge looks like." I stared at that message for a long time, because she was right. We hadn't repaired the road we once walked. We'd built a bridge, from her island to mine, not to erase the distance, but to meet in the middle. To choose each other not out of habit, not out of guilt, but because the love we shared had finally learned how to breathe. She finally saw me. The picture she sent sat as my phone's background for weeks. Not because it was flattering, it wasn't. My eyes were half closed, my smile slightly crooked, and Emma's hair was windblown. But there was something about it. Something true. We weren't performing for anyone in that photo. We were just there. Two women sitting on a bench that held years of memory, finally seeing each other as we were, not through the eyes of duty or expectation, but with something simpler. Recognition. There were still hard days. This wasn't a perfect transformation. Emma didn't suddenly call every morning, and I didn't stop worrying overnight. But the fear I once carried that I had lost her for good began to loosen its grip. One Sunday afternoon, she brought over a photo album. Not a digital one. An actual old-fashioned binder filled with printed photos she had ordered from her phone. I've been meaning to do this for years, she said as she sat down beside me on the couch. I thought, maybe we could go through them together. The first photo was of her at age 5, missing her two front teeth, holding a stick with a marshmallow that had definitely been on fire. I thought I was such a grown-up, she said, laughing. The next was a photo of me younger, wearing a sun hat, laughing at something off camera. Emma looked at it for a long time. I never realized how young you were, she whispered. Raising me. Doing it all alone. I always thought of you as this immovable presence. Like a tree that was always just there. I smiled faintly. Trees can still get tired. I know, she said. And I'm sorry for all the times I saw your roots as chains instead of shelter. That took my breath away. She didn't look at me when she said it. She just kept turning the pages as if every photo was another stitch in the tear we had spent so many years trying to mend. There was one picture near the end of the album that made me pause. It was from a vacation we took when she was 12. We had gotten lost hiking and ended up laughing so hard we both tripped in the mud. Someone passing by had offered to take our photo. We were covered in dirt, doubled over in laughter, cheeks, red arms tangled. And in that image, I saw the version of us I'd missed the most. Not just mother and daughter, but partners, teammates. We used to be so close, I said softly, my finger tracing the edges of the page. Emma leaned her head on my shoulder. We are again, aren't we? I nodded. Yes, just differently. And that difference, it mattered. Because I had learned painfully and slowly that loving someone doesn't mean holding them in place. It means letting them go far enough to find their way back and still being here when they do. Later that week, I received a package at the door. No return label, just my name carefully written. Inside was a journal, leather-bound, beautiful. On the first page in her handwriting, "For the stories you didn't get to tell when you were busy helping me write mine." I pressed my hand over the page and sat there in silence. It was the first time in a long time that I felt like someone had made space for me. Not as a mother, not as a caretaker, but as a woman. That night, I lit a candle and wrote on the first page, "My name is Diane Whitaker. I raised a daughter who forgot me and then remembered. I stayed silent when I felt discarded, but I never stopped loving. This is the story of how I found my voice again." Because that's what this journey had been. Not a redemption arc. Not a revenge. Not a dramatic twist. Just one woman learning that being quiet doesn't mean being invisible. And one daughter learning that growing up doesn't mean growing apart. As the weeks turned into months, our Sundays became routine. We cooked, talked, sometimes just sat with our own thoughts together. And slowly, Emma started asking different questions, not ones about bills or work or errands, but real questions. What did you dream about when you were my age? Was it hard not having someone to lean on? Do you regret giving so much? That last one made me pause. I looked her in the eyes. Sometimes, but I never regretted who I gave it to. She reached for my hand across the table, held it with both of hers, and I knew without her saying a word she finally saw me. Not as the woman who reminded her to take her vitamins, not as the person who used to fold her laundry just the way she liked it, not as the overly caring, overly available shadow she once resented. She saw me as someone who had made mistakes, as someone who had been too present, too insistent, too giving, but also as someone who had always loved her, even when that love went unnoticed. Sometimes we have to let people forget us for a while, not because we want to be forgotten, but because memory, when it returns on its own, is more powerful than anything we can force. Emma remembered. She returned. And she stayed. Not out of guilt, not out of need, but out of love. And that was enough. So if you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story, for holding space for a voice that went quiet for too long. And maybe if you're holding on too tightly to someone you love, let go just a little. Let them drift if they must, because sometimes the space we give is the very bridge they need to come back. If you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or unneeded, I see you. And I hope my story reminds you your love matters, even in silence, even in distance, even when it feels like it's not enough. Because one day someone will turn around and finally see you. If you've ever had to rebuild a relationship from scratch, or found your voice after being quiet for too long, share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow Grace's Truth for more stories that speak directly to your heart.